Well, welcome to Black History Conversations. Unbelievably, we're now starting season 8. My name is Liz Millman. I'm a director of Learning Links International, and I have to thank my colleague Simon Feringo from Belong Nottingham for supporting throughout these sessions. And we're moving through now, and by the time we get to the 31st of March, we'll have actually done 100 sessions of conversations about Black history. Now, the folks who've joined us today have introduced themselves and told us a little bit about their background, but we're now moving forward and we're looking forward to hearing from Sarah Parks. Sarah did a really lovely review about Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. So we're going to hear some more from Sarah in a moment. And then we're going to be welcoming Dr. Jonathan Bush from Durham University, because he's working now on the Race Equality Charter for his university. They've achieved Bronze Award standard now, and we'll be looking forward to hearing about his research into the history of Durham University and the income derived from slavery in a similar way to many other of the old universities. Also, its links with colonialism. And then we'll be hearing a little bit more about the work of the Windrush Allies Network. We have an opportunity always for them to catch up with what we're doing. Now, I'm in Australia, so I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. I pay my respect to the elders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions and the culture of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the nation. The acknowledgement for country is something that you're expected to do if you start any meeting here in Australia. I share with you. But I thought that each week I would just tell you a little bit, because we haven't done much about Australian history. And this week we're running up to the 26th of January, which is the day when Australians celebrate how the British invaded Australia. It's a bit of a strange day, really. So this comes under the heading of Black History Myths and Legends. So it just shows what a good painting can, what messages a good painting can pass over. And as you can see here in Australia, Black Lives Matter has also generated concern about the number of statues we've got, particularly of folks of James Cook and others. So just a few snippets there. Aboriginal people, however, see the day as a day of mourning and a day of protest. And since 1938, the Aboriginal people have been complaining about recognising January the 26th as a positive day when white Australia was founded. There's a lot more that we can follow up with that. And that goes on every year. It's now tends to be called Survival Day, and there will be events in the parks and places now we're free of COVID, well, freer of COVID, to help people understand more about the Aboriginal culture. So as you can see just from these photographs, that's the last slide I've got on this. It's a day which is really quite contentious now, and so it should be. Okay then, so I'm going to stop there, but with the sharing so that I can introduce Sarah. Now, Sarah, tell me, you were obviously absolutely thrilled reading that report that you found this book by Trevor Noah, and yet it's not a recent publication, is it? It's been out for a few years now. Sarah, can you take your mic? That's
yes.
it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I no, it's not a recent publication at all. Here's the book, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. It's not recent at all, but I've read it recently, basically. So my husband actually read it a few years ago, and both myself and my 13-year-old daughter read it. Yeah, over, I think it was sort of October time that I read it, or actually more recently than that I finished it. Anyway, oh yeah, it was over the Christmas holidays I read it. And
okay, I very rudely didn't ask you to introduce yourself first. So introduce yourself, and then we're going to hear about this book.
Okay, yeah.
Noah, and
So I'm
I see little clips from him, so it was of interest to me. Over to you.
So hi everybody, I'm Sarah Parks. I am a parenting and legacy coach. So I help parents really with conscious and gentle parenting approaches, is what I do. And in the last couple of years, I have become more engaged with Black history. And yeah, so that's who I am, and that's my journey really.
And you're joining us from Scotland?
I'm in Edinburgh in Scotland. I live here with my husband and my two daughters, ages 13 and 9. And
you know Professor Sir Jeff Palmer, who's been
I do, yes, yeah. So I met Jeff Palmer at a Black history event 2 years ago now, it is, or 18 months ago, and he's been doing a lot of work in Edinburgh around some of the statues in Edinburgh, and there's a walk as well around sort of depicting I suppose a more accurate history. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, one of the reasons that I picked up as well for you, having done this review and being willing to tell us about the book that Trevor Noah, well, actually books that Trevor Noah's, because he's written a book for younger people as well on the same theme, which is really interesting. But our last session before Christmas, actually, we had a live link with, I think it was Durham, but I might be wrong, in South Africa. So it's South African history is a history that we haven't really looked at yet. So this is a way of us getting into looking at South African history. We've had an opportunity with Professor Sati Fwakshat to look at West African but more particularly Nigerian history. We've looked at stories about the Democratic Republic of the Congo history, and Belgian history. There's more to look at there, but it's really lovely that we've been able to come in, and it's good that Trevor Noah presents things quite light-heartedly. So I can't wait to get hold of a copy of the book, but I'm waiting on a list at the library here.
Brilliant. So just out of interest, before I go into what I've taken away from reading this book, and why I suppose I enjoyed it so much, can anybody raise their hand? So everybody raise their hand who's actually read it already. And if you don't have your camera on, if you could use the reaction symbol to raise your hand. So has anybody read it? Nobody has read it.
No, okay. It doesn't look like it.
Oh, it's great. It's great, because what I loved about it is I'm not much of a historian, to be honest, and I'm not particularly scholarly. I'll be honest. I've done a degree, but I'm not particularly scholarly. And it's really accessible. It's funny, and I think lots of people will be able to relate to it, because it's this experience of as a child and growing up as a child, and the title Born a Crime, because in South Africa, in fact, I'll read the Immorality Act it starts with at the beginning, which is to prohibit illicit carnal intercourse between Europeans and natives and other acts in relation thereto. So basically it was a crime to it was basically a crime to have mixed relationships, weren't allowed, and it was a crime to have sex with somebody from but it was interesting in this bit, because I'm not going to read the whole part of it. I will actually. Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, the Senate and the House of Assembly of the Union of South Africa as follows. Any European male who has illicit carnal intercourse with a native female, and any native male who has illicit carnal intercourse with a European female shall be guilty of an offence and liable on conviction of imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years. Any native female who permits any European male to have illicit carnal intercourse with her, and any European female who permits any native male to have illicit carnal intercourse with her shall be guilty of an offence and liable on conviction to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 4 years. So basically it was a crime and you could go to prison for it. And so he grew up with his mom, and you know, she kind of got through round things. There's a chapter called Loopholes. So, you know, she lived with her son in an area, and the way she got to take him to the park and go out, for instance, is she would bring along somebody else, and she would essentially pretend to be like the nanny. So his childhood photos are mostly with somebody else and his mum in the background, though kind of very rarely with him, you know.
Sarah, remind me, was his mum white or black?
His mum is a black African woman, and his dad is originally from a white male from Switzerland. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and his mum chose to have him, very much chose to have him, because she wanted to have a child. But obviously it was a tricky path with the person that she chose, you know. So yeah, and the thing that struck me about it is he's so funny in the way he writes, and it gives such an insight into, because he lived in different places. He lived in sort of black community with his wider family, and when he was there when he was younger, he wasn't allowed out. Like, he couldn't go out, he was pretty much housebound. You know, we've all experienced lockdown. He was like that because he couldn't be seen playing out, so he couldn't go out of the garden, which was very difficult as a child, you know.
Trevor Noah's not particularly is light, isn't he?
He's pretty light skinned. Yeah, he is pretty light skinned. And so, you know, within the black community, who, you know, people thought of him as white because he was quite light skinned. And he talks a lot about his education as well, and being, you know, I suppose in those days it was described as being coloured, and he was the only person in his school who wasn't black or white, you know, so he was this in between, and found means and ways of and obviously comedy often is a way of being able to kind of fit in and be accepted in different social groups without necessarily fully being part of them. But he very much, as he explores, you know, explains, and as he was growing up, really felt associated with being black, definitely more than being white, for sure. But I thought I would read a couple of extracts from it, because, you know, I think with the comedy in this, it makes it so accessible. And for young people, like I say, my 13-year-old daughter has read this book and really enjoyed it, found it really interesting. And it's giving her a sense of history without having to read a history book necessarily. Do you know what I mean? A lot of history, a lot of background. He talks about where his mum came from. He talks about where his stepdad came from, the village. And yeah, it's really interesting. So before apartheid, any black South African who received a formal education was likely taught by European missionaries, foreign enthusiasts eager to Christianize and Westernize the natives. In the mission schools, black people learned English, European literature, medicine, the law. It's no coincidence that nearly every major black leader of the anti-apartheid movement, from Nelson Mandela to Stephen Biko, was educated by the missionaries. A knowledgeable man is a free man, or at least a man who longs for freedom. The only way to make apartheid work, therefore, was to cripple the black mind. Under apartheid, the government built what became known as Bantu schools. Bantu schools taught no science, no history, no civics. They taught metrics and agriculture, how to count potatoes, how to pave roads, chop wood, till the soil. It does not serve the Bantu to learn history and science because he is primitive. The government said, this will only mislead him, showing him pastures in which he is not allowed to graze. To their credit, they were simply being honest. Why educate a slave? Why teach someone Latin when his only purpose is to dig holes in the ground? Mission schools were told to conform to the new curriculum or shut down. Most of them shut down, and Black children were forced into crowded classrooms in dilapidated schools, often with teachers who were barely literate themselves. Our parents and grandparents were taught with little sing-song lessons, the way you teach a preschooler shapes and colours. My grandfather used to sing the songs and laugh about how silly they were. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, la 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 la. We're talking about fully grown teenagers being taught this way for generations. What happened with education in South Africa with the mission schools and the Bantu schools offers a neat comparison of the two groups of whites who oppressed us, the British and the Afrikaners. The difference between British racism and Afrikaner racism was that at least the British gave the natives something to aspire to. If they could learn to speak correct English and dress in proper clothes, if they could anglicize and civilize themselves, one day they might be welcome in society. The Afrikaners never gave us that option. British racism said, if the monkey can walk like a man and talk like a man, then perhaps he is a man. Afrikaner racism said, why give a book to a monkey? So that is just an extract, a short extract from the end of chapter 4, Chameleon, where he talks about how he kind of fitted in and how he traversed the different groups. So yeah, there's a real mixture between his personal experience and him talking about the history in this way, which is great because I've learned more from this book, you know, about South African history than I knew before. There's also a really, and it's talked about on the back of the book, which is, and he talks about it through the book around identity and names and, you know, traditional names and how people chose names. And there's a really funny story in here about one of his friends who was called Hitler, and a Jewish gathering that they got paid to. It was like a gig for them. They were doing the music in it. And because they didn't know who Hitler was, they had no inkling that going, go Hitler, go Hitler, go Hitler at a Jewish event would be offensive. So, you know, and it's really funny how he kind of describes kind of what happened. But I'll read you a bit about why they didn't know that might not be appropriate at this Jewish event. So Hitler, although an unusual name, is not unheard of in South Africa. Part of it has to do with the way a lot of Black people pick names. Black people choose their traditional names with great care. Those are the names that have deeply personal meanings. But from colonial times through the days of apartheid, Black people in South Africa were required to have an English or European name as well, a name that white people could pronounce, basically. So you had your English name, your traditional name, and your last name. 9 times out of 10, your European name was chosen at random, plucked from the Bible or taken from a Hollywood celebrity or a famous politician in the news. I know guys' names named after Mussolini and Napoleon, and of course Hitler. Westerners are shocked and confused by that. But really, it's a case of the West reaping what it has sown. The colonial powers carved up Africa, put the Black man to work, and did not properly educate him. White people don't talk to Black people, so why would Black people know what's going on in the white man's world? Because of that, many Black people in South Africa don't really know who Hitler was. My own grandfather thought a Hitler was a kind of army tank that was helping the Germans win the war. Because that's what he took from what he heard on the news, So for many Black South Africans, the story of the war was that there was someone called Hitler, and he was the reason the Allies were losing the war. This Hitler was so powerful that at some point Black people had to go help white people fight against him. And if the white man has to stoop to ask the Black man for help fighting someone, that someone must be the toughest guy of all time. So if you want your dog to be tough, you name your dog Hitler. If you want your kid to be tough, you name your kid Hitler. There's a good chance you've got an uncle named Hitler. It's just a thing. So, yeah. And that's like I say, I learned so much from this book about names and about Black culture in South African Black culture particularly. So
Absolutely.
I'm interested to hear how some of those extracts have landed with those listening.
Well, I'm fascinated because I've not been able to read it yet. But just to explain for those of you who may not even know who Trevor Noah is, Trevor Noah is a mixed race South African who, through comedy, has really got to a world platform. Now I'm in Australia, and my social media, Trevor Noah popped up all the time with the different things he's doing, and he's just been doing for years now. He's done a long series on American TV, but I don't know how well Trevor Noah is known by others in the UK. So I don't know. I'll let anybody else comment or ask a question before I come in again. Garrick?
Yes, fascinating, Sarah, just listening to those extracts. And a couple of points I'd just like to raise. In particular, you referred to names. Now, of course, that's a massive issue. African names, Asian names, etc., Middle Eastern names. We know this because I did a piece of work in Liverpool about employment and how, people were prevented from access to employment, access to university places, access to a number of things based on the name, because of course, the name, it defines you. I can give you one good example of a mixed relationship, a gentleman from Nigeria, and his wife is English, British, and he qualified as a computer engineer, a computer, whatever they call. But ever since his qualification, he's never been able to get a full-time job. His wife applied for a job using her details without the qualification, and she was offered the job based on the name. See? And there are thousands of people who have to revert to, European name just to get through the first page of the application. But of course, when they arrive and, they see the person, it's a different story. I worked in 2 universities in Liverpool, and, when I speak to people on the telephone, prior to them arriving in the UK, because I was responsible for international education, when they arrive and they meet me, they couldn't sort of put the two together. It's like, well, we didn't expect you to be a Black person. And these are really big issues, and they continue to be an issue in the wider society of institutional racism, systemic, it's everywhere. But you also mentioned something else about.
Before you go on, Garrick, I just wanted to just reply to that and just share that I've had that a lot, and I kind of forgotten that you know, when I turn out with my dreads and, you know, how I look, you know, people, and with how I sound, people don't expect me to look how I look.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the case. There's also the point in relation to skin color, because you referred to Trevor Noah, a very light skin, and easily could be passed on as white, similar to Lena Horne back in America, etc. You know, you didn't sort of identify with the Black community. You sort of, you know, middle of the road, as it were, and you're able to navigate much better. However, skin color clearly attached to the colonial slavery, the whole issue.
Yeah.
There was a famous interview with Michael Parkinson with Muhammad Ali. And the question that Michael Parkinson put to Muhammad Ali was this: why is it your color is, you know, why you look like this? And you know what the response was? Muhammad has said to Michael Parkinson, because your ancestry raped my ancestry and produced this color. And that is a reality. And we also know from history that the child of a slave master, being mixed, lighter skin, had more privilege, were taken away from plantation, were educated in England, in other places, purely on the color of skin. We still see that issue today in the world. Yeah,
it
in
still
the
carries
Caribbean,
on,
in
doesn't
Nigeria.
it?
You know, people try to lighten their skin because opportunity. Yeah. So, you know, what you've just said hasn't, you know, that's not sort of historical. That's actually living history, as it were, today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. Yeah. I mean, he talks about, you know, in between these personal stories and stuff, he does weave in, you know, history and how it was at the time when he was growing up. And, you know, with apartheid, you were kind of ranked according to the color of your skin, right? And where you could live was determined by the color of your skin. And also, but your rank could change. So this constant pitting people, I think that's one of the things he mentions, it be that the most horrible thing about it is pitting everybody against each other. You know, yeah.
And it still goes on now. We have that issue. You know, we talk about, you know, African, you know, as people, but we still see all those issues among all the tribal people of Africa. So, you know, there's nothing new. But of course, we know this because slavery, you know, you were forced to leave your language and take on a different language. And the whole idea of that was not for the slave to be able to communicate together. It was to be able to separate. So, you know, you couldn't plan any revolt, etc., because the idea was you know, you wouldn't understand each other. So that was carefully engineered.
Yes.
And the whole idea of not being able to read, and if a slave caught learning a page from the Bible, because that was the only place you would get written words, then they were punished. Yeah, even for reading, you know, a text from the Bible. And of course, the master will, you know, ensure that the slave never have access to reading, because that would give them more power. And that was not the way.
Yeah. And, you know, when he talked about the schools, it's like to give people enough to be able to be in, you know, essentially slaves, because although people were paid, right, because slavery wasn't, when he was growing up in the 80s, obviously slavery wasn't that, but it was essentially slavery. Like, people barely paid enough to live and kept and, you know, not giving a proper education to be able to get out of those situations. He talks about, because he was really fortunate, somebody gave him a CD writer, a computer and a CD writer, which meant he was able to get music, copy music and sell it, and he created a business all around music. And, you know, he's, and I think this is what you saw, Liz. I think I shared that. Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, he'll eat forever. But he said, but that's not enough. You actually need the fishing equipment. It's not enough to know how to fish. You actually need the equipment to be able to go fish and the river to fish in. And, you know, so for him, having that computer and being able to create a business and earn money, it gave him the opportunity to be able to earn money and kind of which most people didn't have. So there's so much in this book. If you haven't read it, it is brilliant. It's really worth a read, and it's funny and it's informative, and it's brilliantly written and sad, and it's all of it. It's all of the things. So I highly recommend it.
So it's interesting because you know, we went around the screen, nobody else had read the book, but certainly it looks as if it's worth reading. Now, just before we come to you, Miles, because I know you've been waiting for a little bit, we're just all right. Bunmi Oisan has joined us from Canada. She's not feeling too good today, got a really bad throat, so we're not going to get you chatting, Bunmi. But you've said you can't wait to read the book, and I'm sure on your Pan-African conversations that maybe, who knows, now Trevor Noah's got more time on his hands, maybe we'll get to interview him.
He's doing a tour as well. He is coming to London and Glasgow this year. He's doing a tour because he's left the Daily Show, or he's leaving the Daily Show, so he's going on tour this year around Africa and America and a bit of Europe. One of the things as well, off the back of what Garrett was saying, in terms of tribes and the way in which he navigated being kind of all these different groups, is he speaks 5 languages, so he would speak African languages that people, and that was the thing that connected him with people. And so people would think, well, if you're speaking the same language as me, you're all right, you know. So he got out of tricky situations, from nearly being mugged to them going, actually, you're okay, on you go. Do you know what I mean? So, and he talks about those occasions as well. So he speaks quite a few languages as well.
Fantastic. And June Elizabeth has said that Garrick's spot on the reverse example. And she said that sadly, you've experienced systemic racism over the 50 years you've had since leaving school, June Elizabeth. But June Elizabeth, because of time, I'm going to ask Miles to come in now, and then we want to make sure that we've given Jonathan time to share with us, because we're interested to know what's happening at his Durham University. So Miles, over to you then for a couple of moments.
I'm sorry, I really didn't want to cut off June Elizabeth. I'll be very quick with what I got to say, which is that what I appreciate about the Trevor Noah book is something I'm appreciating about this book that I'm reading at the moment.
Oh, right.
Which is by an author whose parents have done that exact thing that Bunmi was talking about. They've given her a white man sounding name for her job applications. And she sort of talks about, she's very equivocal about that. But what I like about this book is the same thing I'm getting from Sarah about the Trevor Noah book, is that it's written from personal experience. And that is an incredible way of absolutely getting the fine detail of what being the subject of racism is like, I think. So I really recommend this. I'm only sort of halfway through, but it's a very engaging read in the same sort of way.
I think that's really kind of you, Miles. I do screenshots as the sessions are going on, and I've tried to get the screenshot of that.
Oh,
So
I can put the name in the chat.
oh, that would be really kind. Thank you. That'd be really lovely. Okay, then. So
Just to ask, Liz, do you save the chat as well?
Thank you. Sorry, Sarah.
I was just asking, do you save the chat to share?
Well, we don't usually share it, but we can save it, and people can, if we want.
Yeah, because at the end of the meeting, you can download, you can download the chat and then share it with people who didn't come. You don't get to see that bit, do you? Yeah.
No, it's not something that we've done before, but it's certainly a good idea. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, June Elizabeth, was there anything that you just wanted to add before I say thank you to Sarah and introduce Jonathan?
No, well, you mentioned my name, yeah, and living in Middle England, so I don't need to say, when I put applications in, just like what Garrett said, when I go for the job, I've got the job on paper, but what I wanted to just close with, I saw something the other day. I'll send it to you if I find it. It's a nice little story to end. There was a Black family, African family in America, and they were just not really well off. And their son found a rickety piano in the basement, and he was playing it, right? And then the dad realized that he could play. The end story was that there was a white man, who this young Black boy's musical gift came to his attention, and he cashed in his inheritance. And then what you see, it starts off with a grand piano being sent to the house, and then he took his inheritance, and it's happening now, and he's paid for him to get top class lessons as well as teaching him himself. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I just wanted to share that, because
Thank you so much.
Spoke about the musical and everything as well. So I thought that was a nice little story.
Lovely, thank you very much. And it's interesting how, we learn from different sorts of stories. Sarah, I can't thank you enough. That was really good, really inspirational. And I think, Miles, it was good for you to share that book as well, because one of the ways that we can learn more about Black history is by reading books, and now more and more watching films. There's some obviously very interesting stuff coming up. So Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Now, just before...
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. And I want to talk to you some more, because you've got good ideas about social media and how we could promote and do things better, which is certainly something we want. Kwaku's doing a thumbs up there as well. So excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So welcome to others who have joined us over this last little while. Horace Barnes, it's great that you're with us. Wilton MacDonald, great to see you from Poland after your tours around the world, and you've been putting in lots of information into the chat, and we'll catch up with you later. Bunmi's joined us, as I say, from Canada. That's really wonderful. Thank you very much. Bunmi runs the Sankova Pan-African series, and maybe you can put in a link in the chat as well. And also, for the first time, welcome to Professor Nyanku Mukherjee. Your picture moved on the screen as I was halfway through reading your name. Really nice to see you. Lovely. Where are you from?
I am in Durham University. I work with Jonathan itself.
Oh,
and if you just follow the vowels in my name, you'll get it.
That's how I'll get there. That's
Thank
lovely.
Thank you
around on my screen. Anyway, we're now going to welcome Jonathan Bush, who wrote to us and said that you were working on this race equality charter, and would we like to know about it? And it's great that your colleague has been able to join us as well. So that's wonderful. So I think you're going to tell us all about it, Jonathan, but I'm sure Nyang Ika, then you'll chip in as well, I'm sure. That's wonderful. Thanks very much indeed. So over to you, Jonathan. I don't know if you wanted to do slides as well or not?
Yeah, hi everybody. Yes, I'll just put my share my screen now.
Okay, that's wonderful.
I'll just put the
Thanks very much indeed, Jonathan. That's wonderful. And you will introduce yourself and explain what your role is, won't you, as university archivist?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Jonathan Bush. I'm university archivist. I look after the archive of the of Durham University, and that's really about looking after the institutional archive. So I don't look after all the archives in the library. So just a beauty of that. So I guess I want to start by talking a little bit about the background to Durham University's involvement in this research. So in summer 2022, following an extensive consultation process, Durham University received confirmation of its Bronze Race Equality Charter Award. The goal of the Race Equality Charter, as I'm sure some of you are aware, is to improve the representation, progression and success of minority ethnic students and staff within higher education. So it provides a framework that guides the university in identifying and evaluating institutional and cultural barriers that stand in the way of BAME staff and students. Now, I'm aware that term BAME is a contentious one, so I'm saying it in the context of what the university of or the terms that the university use rather than my own perspective on it. So across the field, there are currently 97 universities who are members of the Charter, with 29 of those holding bronze awards. Bronze awards are granted to those who have submitted an effective action plan to promote racial equality to be implemented over 3 to 5 years. And Durham University Library and Collections, which is the department I work for, they're working on 2 projects which are linked to this action plan. The first project is really about collections, so it's to assess the university library collections themselves, how they were acquired, how they were interpreted, how they are made accessible, and whether in some cases repatriation of contested items is appropriate. And the second project, which I'm obviously going to talk about today, is legacies of enslavement and colonialism in Durham University. It's one that's going to begin to explore the university's institutional archives and other sources in order to enhance our understanding of any potential involvement with colonialism and historical slavery, or of course income derived from historical slavery. So there's obviously several universities in the process, or either undertaken or in the process of undertaking, research into their own institutional history and the past links with slavery and colonialism. This kind of forms a wider university response to decolonization. So research within these institutions is, for the most part, ongoing, and so any conclusions drawn should only be considered provisional at this stage. Although a number have published findings on their websites or in separate reports, which has actually provided me with a useful framework for my own research. Some cities, you'll see this list here, some cities such as obviously Bristol and Glasgow have long established and recognised connections to the slave trade. So I suppose in some ways it's quite unsurprising that their respective institutions have benefited from significant donations from individuals connected in some way to this trade. Given their long history in providing higher education for the elite and obviously their close proximity to the metropole of the British Empire, it's also not surprising that Cambridge University and St John's College, Oxford, have connections to slavery. And in the case of Oxford, they actually benefit substantially from colonialism as well. So also similarly, Imperial College London, of course, given its colonial foundations, the clues in the name, have uncovered problematic benefactors, some of whom have college buildings and wings named after them, and in some cases the benefactors are actually still living. Other universities, Manchester and Dundee, have also discovered that they benefit financially from slavery based on their connections to local industries, such as cotton and jute. It's worth also noting, particularly in the case of Cambridge and Glasgow, many institutions have been able to highlight a different story as well, another side to the story in the role they played in local, national anti-slavery movements as well as the slave links. So now I want to talk a bit about some of my challenges that I faced in carrying out this research. The obvious elephant in the room at the top here is that the research is not being led by a member of the Black community, or a Black community, should I say, but by a white middle-aged professional, reflecting, I suppose, in some ways, the lack of diversity in the archives profession. This is a major problem within our profession. We have very few members of Black communities in as professionally qualified archivists. So I'd like to humbly and formally acknowledge my white privilege in this regard, and I'll talk about some of the steps that I've taken to try and mitigate this in a few minutes. This is also very much a scoping exercise. It's not the definitive study. I'm hoping that this will be more of a signposting exercise so that others will take up the mantle, researchers, and actually do the more detailed research, because I'm only really working 2 days a week. That's all I'm funded for. In terms of the source limitations, I also have limitations on the type of sources that I can use. It's mainly just either local, i.e. in Durham or Newcastle maybe, or online. I'm not funded to kind of travel to the National Archives and conduct extensive research. And also, given the type of sources and the sort of individuals I'll be concentrating on, there are unfortunately a distinct lack of Black voices in this research. There is, and I'm glad to see that Nayanika is here, because there is a concurrent project taking place at the university researching into the Black students at Durham University, which I think will complement my own project. Given what I've just said about involvement of the Black community in all stages of the project was pretty crucial to me. It's included regular communication with Durham University's Black Staff Network and student Durham People of Colour Association, involving them as much as possible in the research process. There are a number of Black academic staff on the BAME academic staff on the History Working Group, which is overseeing this project, for example. I'm in the process of hopefully recruiting 2 paid Black undergraduate students to work with me on the detailed research that I plan to carry out this summer. Once the research has been carried out and the final report has been published, I'm hoping to organise a community engagement programme that I plan to co-curate with Black communities representatives and assisted by the university's library's learning and engagement team. So just to kind of talk a bit about my findings so far. So many of you will know that the university was founded in the early 1830s, and there's essentially a Church of England, or founded by the Church of England. Because in the early 1830s, the Church of England was essentially under attack for its extraordinary wealth. And there were concerns that some of this might be appropriate for secular purposes. And actually the Diocese of Durham, which Durham University is in, was one of the richest dioceses in the country. And the Dean of Durham, John Jenkinson, at the time, decided to raise the issue of enlarging the system of education to be connected to Durham Cathedral. As such, given the cathedral's long history of promoting education, directing some of its resources to set up an institution of higher learning, still associated with Durham Cathedral, was one that actually garnered reasonably widespread support. The plans were taken forward by the then Prince Bishop of Durham, William van Mildert, and the Reverend Charles Thorpe, who was Archdeacon of Durham. The plans for Durham University quickly received the support of the chapter of Durham Cathedral, who agreed to finance the project. To meet the cost, 1/5 of the income of the Deanery of Durham and the cathedral stalls was allocated to the university, and £1,800 donated annually by the chapter. The Dean offered the revenue of 3 cathedral stalls to the officers of the university for a sum of £1,000, and an annual contribution of £1,000 increased to £2,000 in 1834, as well as the use of a house near the cathedral. Durham University was officially recognised through an Act of Parliament, which received the royal assent on the 4th of July, 1832, with the first students being admitted in autumn 1833. There were 19 scholars, also called foundation students, who were financially supported by the university, and 18 students, all of whom were obviously required to be Anglicans. So as mentioned before, the University of Durham was founded, financed and governed by the Church of England. I'm sure many of you are aware about if you're not aware, there was actually quite a recent report published. The Church of England's role in the transatlantic slave trade and slave ownership, and the church benefited significantly from income derived from slavery. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts was an organisation that was heavily involved in attempts to convert the black slave population in the West Indies to Christianity, and as it had been since the 18th century. It owned plantations and physically branded their slaves with the abbreviation of SPG. Individual clergymen also benefit from slavery, with many receiving compensation following emancipation. But it's also worth mentioning there were also a large number who were very much anti-slavery in their views and actions. So I want to talk now about some of the major personalities connected to Durham University and the views on slavery. So I mentioned anti-slavery. I'm happy, or not happy, but in some ways it's reassuring to report that Archdeacon Charles Thorpe, one of the founders of the university, he was the first warden of the University of Durham. He was actually a noted gradualist, anti-slavery campaigner, being vice president and subscriber to the Newcastle upon Tyne Society for promoting the gradual abolition of slavery in 1823. So his views are very much on the side of anti-slavery. James Finley Weir Johnston, founder of a local grammar school in Durham and reader in chemistry and mineralogy at Durham University from 1833 until his death in 1853. He attended the World Anti-Slavery Conference in 1840 and published anti-slavery views in America. And in his book, Notes on North America, Agricultural, Economical, and Social, he expressed views which were sympathetic towards the slave population there. Sympathetic towards the conditions of the slave population, should I say, rather than the situation of slavery. So Thomas Masterman Winterbottom, he was a physician, philanthropist, anti-slavery campaigner, and donator of his library to the university. Winterbottom was on the committee of the Newcastle upon Tyne Society for abolishing slavery all over the world in 1836. He was also famous for carrying out research into the identification of symptoms of what was then known as sleeping sickness. So in terms of actual slavery connections, the direct slavery connections have so far actually in some ways been harder to link. The way that I've approached this is to identify major donors and other benefactors of the university and search the legacies of British slavery database to determine their involvement. This is not without its problems, for example, in terms of generations and inheritance of investment and income. You know, how can you calculate a precise percentage of a donation from an individual who has profited in some way from the slave trade, which could be said to have been tainted by slavery? In other words, if an individual donates £100,000 to the university, how much of that should the university be responsible for? It's not an easy answer. 20%, 50%, all of it. I mean, that's a matter of some debate, I think. So at the moment, then, I've simply identified names of individuals who played some role in the university, i.e. either donating money or in a position where they can influence the governance and management of the university. Preliminary research would suggest that the slavery connection is significantly less than other institutions, but we're still in the early days. There are, however, some notable individuals, many with connections to the Diocese of Durham, who received compensation following the Slavery Compensation Act of 1837, and by association may have contributed, I say that very lightly, may have contributed financially either through donations or scholarships to the university, and so require further research. First of these is Reverend Edward Maltby, who was Bishop of Chichester and Durham. William was the cousin of Roland and William Maltby, the former owning a plantation in Granada. Edward Maltby donated significant sums to the university, used investment interests to fund a scholarship named after him, and donated his library on his death. So he was very, very much connected financially with the university. So I haven't found a direct link with money being given to Edward, which he was then able to use for these purposes, but it's a start anyway. The Reverend Henry Philpotts, who was Bishop of Exeter and Canon of Durham Cathedral. Philpotts was not directly linked to the slave trade, but his brother Thomas was a slave owner. And actually, Henry Philpotts also harbored strident pro-slavery views, which actually is quite rare to find these so explicitly recorded at the time, because they were published in correspondence with the Darlington Anti-Slavery Society. This was published in the Newcastle Courant newspaper in 1824. He basically refused to sign an anti-slavery petition organised by this society, arguing that slavery was neither inconsistent with the tenets of the British Constitution nor inconsistent with Christianity, citing the lack of evidence in the Bible of any anti-slavery views held by Jesus or his followers. Another clergyman who I haven't actually got a picture of was the Reverend William Smolt Temple, who was rector of Dinsdale. He was also minor canon of Durham Cathedral. He received £1,192, a payout for 109 slaves on the Clermont estate in Jamaica. Another person we're looking at the moment is Howard Douglas Horsfall, or much later. And again, it really raises questions about to what extent should somebody's income a couple of generations away still be regarded or tainted with slavery connections. But he was founder and he was a significant donor to St. Chad's College, which was an independent college of the university in 1904. His grandfather received significant compensation, £800,000 for 440 slaves. And some of this money may have passed down to Douglas, but it's worth mentioning that Douglas Horsfall was a stockbroker in his own right, so he probably would have earned quite a lot of money in himself. So to what extent was that tainted with slavery, the money that he gave at the university? And the final person I mentioned, again, I haven't got a picture of this person, is Reverend James Ellis, who was rector of Clothall in Hertfordshire, and he was a member on the Durham University Board in 1833. He was awarded compensation of £6,388. With Vera Fane and the Reverend Henry Chaplin as mortgagees of Clark's Court in Granada. So moving on to the kind of more colonial connections, unlike Oxford and Cambridge, Durham University did not act as a magnet for graduates wishing to pursue a career in the colonial service. Although there was one very tenuous connection. Henry Holland, the first Viscount Knutsford. Holland was colonial secretary between 1887 and 1892, during which time he was responsible for granting the Royal Charter to Cecil Rhodes and the British South Africa Company. So in his defence, he was actually pretty horrified by aspects of the Rhodes Plan, but was unable to control the early phase of Rhodes' drive to the north and the subsequent situation that developed from there. His tenure off actually ended in August 1892. Holland actually attended Durham University for a very short period, perhaps only a few months, receiving the Durham Prize for Latin verse as an undergraduate before transferring to Cambridge. So again, to what extent can we suggest a link between the university and Holland's colonial career? In this case, I would suggest we probably can't, but it's worth mentioning about how, as an example of the difficulties that are faced with this. Aside from individuals, the role that Durham University played in colonialism appears to be a specifically missionary one, beginning in 1860 with their involvement alongside Oxford, Cambridge and Dublin in what was called the university's mission to Central Africa. This was essentially a high church initiative to provide funds for sending out at least 6 missionaries to Central Africa to convert convert people, or indigenous people, to the to Christianity. So I don't know whether many of you are aware, but Durham University also played quite a prominent role in missionary work through colonial education. And we've heard Sarah them talking about Trevor Noah's and experiences of school and this the kind of westernized schooling that he had. This kind of lasted, to university level at this time, from the 1870s to 1960s. Durham University provided what was then affiliated degrees to Codrington College in Barbados, and also Forbay College in Sierra Leone. In both cases, and from secondary research that I've carried out so far, assessments of Durham University's role in these institutions have fallen broadly into essentially two camps. The first, written from the perspective of an institutional history, has highlighted the positive aspects of Durham University's involvement. Codrington, for example, was the first overseas institution to have the right to grant a prestigious degree of liberal education from a British university. And both Codrington College and Forbay College offered degree courses for the first time to Indigenous populations, helping many West Indians and Africans to pursue careers not simply as missionaries, but also in other professions, lawyers, teachers, doctors, etc. So the other side of the coin is that, and as one that Sarah touched on in a review of the book, highlight that such degrees were in reality sort of manifestations of colonialism, reflecting the transplantation of Indigenous culture with a very conservative and unquestioning conformity, very westernized education, based on the culture of Britain. Some historians have shown that in Sierra Leone, the educational debate was more heated in the years prior to affiliation, though. Some reformers, such as James Africanus Horton, were persuaded that a Western-style education was the key to success, albeit tailored towards African circumstances, while others, including William Grant, Reverend James Johnson, and Edward Blyden, opted for an educational program dominated by African history, languages, and customs. So the affiliation that was signed with Durham University was essentially a compromise, offering a degree from Durham University, but did not offer an African faculty capable of addressing and embracing West African language, tradition, and culture. Some historians have also noted the lack of interest that Durham showed towards Codrington and Forbay, respectively, particularly in the 1950s, 1960s, when such institutions becoming more independent. There are actually, in some ways, there are very few primary sources within the university archive relate to Durham's affiliation with these colleges. It's probably likely because the archives are actually held by the colleges themselves. The exception in the latter period, where the papers of Sir James Fitzjames Duff, who was a former warden of the university, are quite rich in the often fractious relationship between Durham and its overseas colleges. So it's likely, therefore, that the bulk of primary research that I'm going to carry out in the next few months will concentrate on that later period. So to finish off, just want to say what's next. So further research, researching the accounts, donation, and scholarship books to get a detailed picture of the individuals and institutions who were financing the university in the 19th century, and whether they had any slavery connections. I'm also researching the correspondence relating to the university's links with Codrington College and Forbay, as I just mentioned before, particularly in the later period. I hope to complete the report and publish it to as wide an audience as possible. We've ensured that we've followed the ethics process at the university, because I was quite adamant that whatever I find should not be suppressed by the university, regardless of how reputationally damaging it might seem to them at the time. It's better to be transparent and accountable with these sorts of things, I feel. And finally, organising a community engagement programme to be co-curated with Black communities, which I mentioned at the beginning. So if anyone has any questions, I say tentatively, then please feel free to ask them. I realise I've probably gone quite a bit over time, or we are over 2 o'clock.
Don't worry, Jonathan. That was absolutely fascinating. Well done. That was really, really good.
Thank you.
Okay, then, so you can, I don't know, how do you unshare your screen? I don't know how to do
Oh,
that.
that's true. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I'll
Okay,
start it.
now, Kwaku's put a message for you to say that his father came from the Gold Coast to attend Durham University in the late 1940s, and they went on a visit to the university in 2017. So the New Line magazine was still being sent to him in Ghana. So that was incredible. But then sadly, Kwaku says that he had to inform the university of his father's passing in 2018. But yeah, so it just shows where the links are of universities around the world and the impact. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was absolutely fascinating. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions that are points that you want to raise. Okay. Nyankia, would you like to come in now? That would be really lovely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz. It's Nyanika again. Nyanika, that's it. You got it. So, Jonathan, thanks very much. We have been, we've also started this project in the Institute of Advanced Studies in Durham, where I'm a co-director on the Black histories, on the absence presence of Black histories in Durham University, which also includes the history of enslavement. And it's linked up to a slavery walking tour I've been doing with students within Durham as part of a module I teach called Violence and Memory, to kind of tell Durham students that the locations that they live in are also steeped in history and not just places outside UK or faraway places. We also kind of we set up the BAME network in 2017, myself and two other colleagues, and also in 2020 we brought out a letter about endemic racism within the university. So that led to, and within that, one of the demands we had made was exploring Durham's history, colonialism and enslavement. So I guess, Jonathan, one thing, so we have also involved Jonathan to come and speak to us in terms of his findings. And it's interesting that the university has hired him in the last year, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess what would be useful to ask is what is it that is new that you have found vis-a-vis what was already known? So the Northeast is dominant about its abolitionist narrative. Apparently, the slave owners lived in the Northwest. Northeast is primarily about abolitionists and the Wilberforce. So what distinguishes the narrative that is predominantly known about the Northeast, and what you have found? And the second question is, as we know, the USPG, many of the bishops in the Durham Cathedral were linked to USPG, right? So when we say that Durham is not, and USPG, as we know, did all the things that you mentioned, but then we are saying that the links with history of enslavement is not clear. So there seems to be a contradiction.
Okay.
So maybe you can unravel that a little bit. And we'll be hearing from you more when we meet in person at the IAS.
Yeah.
But it's great to come to this and listen to the first, your first presentation.
Yeah, so I suppose, this is actually the first time I presented anything on this. So I'm grateful for any comments that anybody makes. So thank you. I suppose from the point of view of your first point about the slavery, the kind of narrative of anti-slavery. I mean, to a certain extent, my research does confirm that. So it confirms that there were individuals who were responsible, who were quite active in this field. But also, there's quite a lot of more recent, well, I say more recent, probably in the last 20 years, research which has suggested that actually the Northeast wasn't quite as anti-slavery as was first assumed. And so at the moment, I'm not going to pretend that I've got any kind of smoking guns under my under my watch, but I don't. I think, you know, there are a few individuals who have these links to slavery that have some involvement in the institution, who have, you know, the names of people that I mentioned, like Maltby, who of course was Bishop of Durham. You mentioned the bishops of Durham were very much linked to the USPG. So I'm not, what I'm trying to say is, at the moment, I'm not suggesting that what I'm going to find is going to be particularly revelatory, but I'm being guided by essentially being guided by the sources, what I'm finding. But I'm only in the early stages of doing the research. I hope to have some research assistance this summer, which I think will help me make further strides in terms of finding further donations. But of course, the Church of England link is a very, very interesting one, because of course the church is heavily embroiled in the slave trade, and of course heavily involved in setting up Durham University. So already there's those two, you know, the two links there. But again, to what extent is the university's involvement with slavery linked to the church's involvement in slavery? How do you separate those two? It's an interesting point. Sorry, what was your second question again? I didn't catch that.
I guess the bishops, the role of the USPG and of the bishops links, intrinsic role with the USPG, and then to say that the links between Durham and slavery is not really apparent or there. Yeah,
so that's mainly what I've discovered so far. You're quite right in saying that. Actually, someone like Edward Maltby is a good example, because he was Bishop of Durham, and if you link him to the USPG, then I'll have to find more concrete links between his funding of certain things within university. So somebody's just asked, what is the USPG? It's the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel, isn't it? So it's a missionary organisation who had, I mentioned in the talk, had links to the Codrington College and the quite nasty slavery stuff that was going on over there. And they used to brand their slaves with SPG on their skin. It's very, very horrible way of dealing with it. But that was what they did at the time. But yeah, so I think I haven't. What I was trying to say was that in my research, I haven't yet found a connection between Maltby and the SPG, but I haven't went too far into that research just yet. So it might be that that'll come up in more detail later on. So my kind of findings so far are quite provisional. They may be subject to change depending on what I find. Is that all right? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be helpful to have a caveat in the beginning that this is really preliminary. The research is not over. Doing the research, that would have to give the full picture, because in a way, when we do research, in a way, we're like scared of presenting anything before the full research is even done. We don't even dare give a presentation in any seminar and conference at all before we have the full picture of what are the contexts and have the evidence completely on hand.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I ought to at least present, you know, for the most part, and trying to ask the questions there and finding out whether anybody kind of picks holes in it is a way of moving forward, really. And if you know, if somebody says, "Oh, well, that can't possibly be true," then I can look into it and say, "Oh, yes, you're quite right there." But it's all part of the research process in my view.
Right. Okay. Well, the conversation will continue, Jordan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That was brilliant. One of the points I was going to make, Jonathan, I think it was almost the last point that came up, was about engaging with the community. Now, History Conversations is about academic and community researchers, authors, and all kinds of other people getting involved, people who want to understand more about Black history. And we've contacted the National Archives, and they seem quite interested in talking with us, because we've got an idea for a project called Engaging Communities in Local Black History Research.
Okay.
a number of us over the last year have been looking at what aspects of Black history and colonial history can you look at in local areas, so that people have had an idea about what they might be researching. So, for example, a little community in Bewdley in Worcestershire has done a really brilliant analysis of the links between the community of Bewdley on the River Severn and Black history. Just amazing. It's an area that I know well, and that it really surprised me what they'd been able to discover. So what I'm thinking is, as a university, as you are studying, you know, the roots of Black history in your setting, that it is really good that you're going to be engaging with the communities, because then you can get a holistic picture, and it makes a whole lot more sense if people understand Black history related to their own community. And yes, we can then see a bigger picture, but if it comes home to your own community, I think it's so much more valid as we challenge racism. It's a really important step forward. So I'm hoping that the National Archives might, Kevin is called from the National Archives, might join us one week. And we can talk about that, because what will happen when you have your report, when you publish your report, people at your university will know, but how will other people know? And people in your community know that you've even done a research report. So the idea then is, if there's some national database, if you like, where locals who've done community research can share their findings, then, you know, it's there for people in the future. So when people do, you know, great lottery funded research projects in local areas, that we keep them, so that people in the future can source those. So I'm pleased to hear that you were doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's so it's still very early days of planning at the moment, and I don't know what form that's going to take. But I'm very keen on doing that, and I think it's absolutely vital to what I'm doing now, that gets done, really. But I think in some ways it's the research that we're carrying out at the university. I'm hoping that there will be local community involvement from the Black communities in the northeast, but also just generally. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm talking today, is to kind of give everybody a heads up on what we're doing, and if anybody has any comments, suggestions, criticism, whatever, I'm happy to take. I'm not shy at this. So just if anybody would want to contact me, I think my email address should be on the website somewhere, or if they contact through Liz or whatever, I'm happy to share my email.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I think that's really helpful. And if we have got ideas, I'm interested in the whole thing of having a charter mark, and realizing that only quite a limited number of universities have even achieved bronze level. Nobody has achieved gold, silver. And they're still discussing what gold level might look like, apparently. To find out. So well done at having taken the first step. Okay then, so Wilton's got a question, and then I shall formally thank you, Jonathan, and then we'll go on to the other bits and pieces. We have taken a good long time, but that's okay, because we weren't sure how the first session of this season was going to go, so that's great. Wilton, I can't hear you.
Okay, just saying thank you for the presentation, and what I'd like to do is I will reach out Jonathan to separately in order to look at the comments that I've made. And this just represents more than 2 years of research. Mind you, my background is financial. I have been involved in 30 years of offshore capital markets at a very high level. And what I've done is it exposed me to the commercial benefits of the narratives that are played out. And those, I think, who benefit. I mean, Trevor Noah, he was mentioned today, and he's just one of many thousands of celebrities who, you live within a filtered media system, a media complex. if you want to call it that way. But for what I see in the funding and the capital funding, and now the world, they said last year was in turmoil, but this year looks to even be more tumultuous. The narrative seems to be and appears to be changing, and more people are pouring into genealogy. So what I'll do is, for the questions I've raised, I've had some comments about the Black history. We're having a talk about Black history in conversation, and no one is putting, except they're calling them extremists. And for me, I'm Judeo-Christian. I'm also following Islam a bit. I mean, there are many religions I embrace, and my wife is an ex-Catholic. But what I've done is looking at all religions across and being just neutral, trying to maintain a neutral, objective stance. It's just we're not having enough discussions. And by the way, you mentioned about data and universities doing stuff. University College, where I attended, they have this whole section, which I think is underfunded. And I reached out to them and they said, sorry, we can't respond to you because like 5 of the professors or history are missing, and they're no longer with the university. So there's a problem in getting funding and resources to talk about the conversations. But what I'd like to do before I lay my head down is to acknowledge that there were European Blacks. There were Euro Blacks, and Miranda Coughlin from Oxford has taken Oxford 1,000 years to finally wake up and say, well, we have a book about Black Tudors in the Tudor age. So it's just shocking and surprising, and these things cannot go unnoticed. And it will not be. As far as my mantle, I'm busy enough with my work as a lawyer and being international finance, but this is important stuff. My family tree is around 520,000 members. People were scoffing first, but then it gets that number and it's a smack in the face, and just say, look, this is here. You have to acknowledge and look at it. And I've just touched base, I've told Liz, with a very, very notable person. One of the most, I would say, world-renowned Christian scientist, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. He published a book, Traced, and Oxford, in this Big Data Institute, they have downloaded all these trees, and all roads lead to Africa, not this notion of a Neanderthal man that was in Europe and crept into Africa and went back out again, this nonsense. I'm not an anthropologist and I'm not a scientist, but I'm a quick learn. And as far as Dr. Jeanson, we had a conversation this week. He's PhD from Harvard, and he can show empirically where whites are more aligned to Asians. And that is the whole narrative about being in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan in the 2nd century BC and migrating west. And if you take the words of Ben Franklin, who said in 1751 in his essay, The Remaking America, the number of whites in the world then, before the population exploded and became a hockey stick, it was a huge skew. People were having 15. My own father, being partly Scot-Irish, had come from a family of 15. So the number of people in the world back then in the 1800s, when the population took off, it would skew the numbers. But Ben Franklin said the number of whites in the world back then, the whole world is swarthy, is black. The number of whites living and he was probably looking at America as a construct pre-independence, 1776, that it would be a place for the whites to grow and flourish. It was his essay, and people say, oh, Mrs. They're taken out of context, and he was referring to something else. Well, he was very clear in that essay. So we have to be clear on sources, on materials, what's coming in. Russia released the Russian icons, which showed black faces in medieval times, times of Christ. And we have been told about, I even had a picture of the white Jesus on the wall. And my dad is, doctor of theology, and for many years, but that's changed. We know National Geographic has changed that narrative about the Black Adam, about Jesus being of color. So we have to be real. And I think what has happened in the UK is the Church of England in establishing that they destroyed a lot of the black icons and iconography. That was destroyed, and it was replaced by what it exists today. I'm not here to demean and destroy. And a London Bridge, in certain places of London, you would see some Negro features, and they would say, well, that's a tribute to slaves. I don't know what they're going to come with. Or like the St. Maurice. You see a statue in a church and you say, oh, that's St. Maurice. Well, not every one of those, not everybody is St. Maurice. And they want to make you say everyone's St. Maurice. So there were Black knights, there were nobles, there was so much literature. John Mackay, he was a lawyer in 1700s, and he described the people who came to court. So I have a lot to say, but I'll reach out to you separately. I don't want to
Please do, yeah,
have a conversation, but it's a lot that I would like to say and keep saying on the Black history, because this is a Black conversation and no one is advancing the conversation. We're at level, I don't know, base level 0. We should be at level 2, level 3. We need to up the ante and in the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. And I do agree. Well, I don't agree that we're at base level 0. I think we're below that. And it's really difficult, even for some of us who've been taking an active interest, to come in at any level with the fantastic research that you've been doing, Wilton. So I think each time you're explaining, I'm understanding a bit more, but we need to really make it understandable to people who are starting looking at the fantastic research you've been doing. Okay then, so Horace is getting on his way now. Horace is from the Why Are West Indians in This Country project. So Horace, that's brilliant. I'm so glad you were able to join us. So thank you very much indeed also to Nyanthika, because you've given us an excellent link there to some of your work. So we'll share that. Horace, thank you. You've given us a link to the Why Are West Indians in the UK project. Kwaku is going to follow up about Mr. Magic Feet, but just back to say The Witch is a film about Enrico Stennett, someone we've talked about in previous sessions. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you, Horace. Good to see you. That's really lovely. Thank you very much indeed. You must come on one of the sessions, Horace, and tell us about Why Are West Indians, please. Will you email me a date? That would be wonderful.
Yeah,
okay, formally then, thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. That was really fascinating and has given us an insight into ways that universities can take this seriously. And if universities aren't taking the lead, then, you know, I feel sorry, because they should. And it's great that you've got this opportunity. So Jonathan, will you come back and let us know how you're getting on? How long will it last for?
So I think I'm going to publish my final report at the end of this year. So it'll be towards the end of the year. I'm happy to come back and talk a bit more
that
about
would be brilliant. So by that stage, we'll be up to season 10. So that would be absolutely fantastic to hear more about that. And also to see how all this information that we're collecting from different projects about the place, how the National Archives or some other organisation might think to save that. So that's really excellent. That's lovely.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. Well, thank you. You can stay with us. We're just going to talk a little bit because we are taking a lot longer than we expect. I'm just checking with Simon. Simon, we're okay for time, are we?
We are. Do you want me though to stop the recording?
Okay, well, I think I'd just like the team from the Windrush Allies Network to have an opportunity to just share what they're doing, and then we'll stop the recording.
Fine with me.
Okay. So Roland, I think you're going to take the lead on this to tell us about the. I'll just share the screen because I've got something somewhere about. Oh, so I've lost it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Really, really difficult, Roland. There's a lot of background information. Can you come in on your other possibility, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
No, we can't. There's so much interference. We can hear you, but it's just awful. June Elizabeth, do you want to say a little bit? Did you get to London to the?
No. I had so many things happening on the day. I had about 6 different appointments. I went in on Zoom though, and it was very interesting.
Right.
What I would report that Martin Ford, he was one of the speakers. Queen's is a judge. He Queen's Counsel. He was the original person who wrote the wrote the papers for the Windrush compensation claims, Windrush schemes, of how it should really be delivered. But they took it, but they changed it to their own perspective. So he gave a great presentation, and also the lawyer, the immigration lawyer, Jackie McKenzie, she gave a great presentation. She's supposed to talk for 12 minutes and she spoke for 36 minutes. So we're supposed to have finished in the Houses of Commons at 8 o'clock, but they extended it to 8:30, and only one thing that came back is that we should have really left some time for a few more questions at the end, but so we'll talk about that with Garrick, because he was chairing it, you see. But it was a very well attended. We had quite a lot of people on Zoom, and there was quite a lot of bodies physically at the House of Commons.
It is so important at the moment, because with this statement that's come through, that's whatever her name is, Suleiman.
Braverman,
She's it's just not acceptable that the recommendations from the Wendy Williams report that will give justice to the Windrush generations in terms of getting the compensation for the inequity of the activities that they've experienced. It's really difficult.
I just wanted to add before I come off. I work as an international voluntary, as an international Windrush advocate, advisor, trainer and ambassador, but I work in conjunction and partnership with different Windrush organizations. So just to explain, I have a Nigerian gentleman. His wife came on the show before, and he was born here, and the British took away his passport when he asked for it to be renewed because he's living in Nigeria. But that wasn't the reason they took it away, right? So just to add that, they say once your British passport taken away by His Majesty's government now, passport agency, you never get it back. You can't get, they will not return it. That's what the head of the Home Office told me twice. And I just was pleased to say that when I sent it to the head of post office, my statement in defense, she sent it straight to complaints, and complaints have identified what I gave. The gentleman that took away the Nigerian gentleman's passport, I didn't put even a quarter of what he should have logged. So they've asked my client to put in an application, 2 photographs, and I've got to send that letter, and they're going to waive the in paying. Fast forward, that was December, got an email this week to say that they've sent his documents to the London and his passport is being processed. And now that's the support of Justice for Windrush. Yes, because we liaise and strengthen each other. Like Garrett will kind of edit what I'm going to say, and Windrush Lives and Windrush Allies Network, because we discuss it with certain people here, and just was saying together we're strong. A bit of good news story.
That's wonderful. That's really good. Just going back to the again, sorry, I've lost the place where I wanted to be on the PowerPoint. Just to say, with the Windrush generation, for folks who perhaps aren't aware, that Black History Conversation supported the setup of the Windrush Allies Network. And so we are at the moment, because there are so many critical issues facing the Windrush generation, that we're taking a special interest in this and following it through. So this was way back in September. I found this clip saying the compensation scheme is not fit for purpose, as it's only 1% of appeals successfully going through, and there's a great deal to follow up on this. So remembering that, you know, last year we had the unveiling of the statue at Waterloo Station, and the different sorts of recognition that there are, that this is an older article as well, back from June, when it was the Prince of Wales commissioning portraits to mark the contribution of the Windrush generation. There's things that are going on, and yet there are realities of difficulties that are quite unbelievable. And I thank you very much indeed, June Elizabeth and Garrick, for sharing, you know, these stories. We also looked at the Barrel children who were left behind or came to the UK later. That was one of the things that we focused on one week. So we're always looking at this particular story. It's an ongoing thread in Black History Conversations. So I'm really sorry, Roland, that we weren't able to hear you. But we've also got Horace Barnes with us from the Wire West Indians here. And Horace, that's about Black history in the community, isn't it? Do you want to respond to us?
Yeah, it's more than that. We did the 500 years of engagement between Britain and African ancestors, and of course the West Indians, which is directly connected to Britain. The project is actually born out of my uncle. He was passenger 680 on the Windrush. Our narrative really is truly to bring communities together, bring a better understanding. The government's tried to isolate the Windrush from this country. Somebody's already mentioned passports a couple of times. The passports that they had were British passports. They were not immigrants. You cannot be an immigrant and come home to Britain, have a British passport, and then somebody tells you, oh, I don't know whether I should let you in or not. And that's where the question is. Well, the actual real question is, what part did the West Indians, the Commonwealth, play in Britain's freedom in the First, the Second World War, the Napoleonic Wars, and many other wars? And it's a shame, really, that the people who are running the Windrush thing, the compensation and the Windrush scandal and the Windrush movements and all the rest of them, are never asking the government, what would you have done if the West Indians then decided that they weren't British because you decided to call them immigrants and decided not to fight for you? What would you have done? The other point I'd like to make, if I can, is because of what was said by Sarah and a few other people to do with the apartheid system. Britain had an apartheid system called the colour bar system, which they sort of enforced in the First and the Second World War, which is quite hilarious, really, because between Lord Kitchener and who's the head of the War Office, and so I believe it's the Germans, we can't seem to get the real bottom of this research. But the joke is that somewhere in there, early in the 1940s of the First World War, someone turned around and said, we'll have no black men killing white men in Europe. Now, the joke about it is you guys were talking about colour, you were talking about names. Now, the one race of people who came charging over when the war started was the West Indians. And of course, they were the ones that they stopped. They were the ones that some of them were, well, a lot of them, as far as I know, were turned away and actually sent back to the West Indies after paying their own money to come and fight for this country. The question you have to ask yourself is, what happened in 1915 March when King George V stamped his foot and said, where was my empire? So why did you go back then to go and get the West Indians, who are now classed as black, no longer classed as colored? Because when they stopped the West Indians who were coming, they were calling them black, and now call the Asians who are coming, they now refer to them as colored, and that's how they got around with it. So you start a brand new regiment called the British West Indian Regiment, and to now engage in the First World War action after saying to them, no, you will not fight in Europe. So who saved who? That's the question. So thank you for your time.
That's so interesting, but it's just so important that we do talk through these things. And I think one of the things after Sarah, I don't know, just sort of resonated with me, that one of the themes that we've never talked about is segregation. And living here in Australia and learning about the White Australia policy, I realise only too well what was going on in terms of segregation here, but we've heard far more about probably South African apartheid. But that might be another theme that we work on. But it's interesting that you're saying, obviously there was the British forms of segregation and the colour bar, and when we've talked about the American GIs coming over and the difficulties with the the benefits they found, that they weren't discriminated against in Britain. They could go into pubs, whereas they wouldn't have been able to socialise with white people in the States, and the issues around that. We also had a speaker about the brown babies as well. So it's just been a fascinating session, and thank you very much for that contribution, because it all adds up and adds together. Now, Roland wasn't able to join us to speak through, but just to say that the Windrush Compensation Scheme Sunday chat is on the second and last Sunday of each month from 2 till 4.
I can come to the phone.
Oh yes, I can hear you now, Roland. That's fine. Okay, and that's going to be next on the 29th of January. So that's Sunday afternoon. And we've got a Zoom link in the passcode. But Roland and Garrick have also got a good website, which is justiceforwindrushgenerations.co.uk. So if you look up justiceforwindrushgenerations.co.uk, you'll be able to find out all the details about that. And then we'll be putting the details on there about the next lobby for Parliament, won't we, Roland? And maybe a write-up of the last lobby. I helped to do the admin on the website, so this is why we're joining together and supporting ourselves. Okay, Roland, anything else you want to add then, please?
No, not much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine. No interference at all. That's wonderful. Anything else? Roland, tell us a little bit about the event on the Lobby of Parliament.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Roland.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, tell us about the Lobby of Parliament.
Yeah, lobby on Wednesday, which was the 18th, that went well. There quite a number of people in physical attendance. The room was filled out. All the speakers were great. We had Martin Ford, Jackie McKenzie, Patrick Vernon, and JCWI as well. Quite a number of participants join us throughout the world, Africa, Jamaica, all over. So it was a good event. Next one is going to be in March, hopefully. Whole idea of the rally and the Lobby of Parliament is to get the Home Office to do what it's supposed to do, which is compensate those that have been impacted, put them back in the position they would have been in at the Home Office, not wrong them. That is not happening at the moment. That is why we are going to Parliament, liaising with the MPs, to get the MPs to get the Home Office to do exactly that. Needs to be changes to the scheme. So that is where at the moment. That's the aim and purpose of the rally and lobby of Parliament. I'll hand back to you now, Liz.
Yeah, I can only congratulate you, Roland. Also June Elizabeth and the rest of the Windrush Allies Network and the Justice for the Windrush Generations. It is really, really important that we do that.
Yeah, so Liz, I just wanted to say, I forgot to say, I'll give you 1 minute. On Sunday, me and my husband, we went to watch a film called The Summer of Soul. And it took place in Harlem the same time that the Woodstock Festival took place. And it was called the Harlem Festival, right? But what they did, and I mean, they said there was 300,000 people there, right? And what they did, they suppressed the showing of this film. So we saw it for the first time last Sunday. And what it had, you had artists like with Stevie Wonder, you had Nina Simone, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and they were just starting in Motown. So I think when Stevie came on stage and was playing, it was significant, right? When he was playing the piano, because at that time when he started to play, the landing on the moon took place. Yes, so that was 1969. So the historical part of that film was very good because they found people who were children or who were artists in the film, and they're elderly now, and they interviewed them. So it was a really good film if you can get to see it. But they have got on Spotify, you can get the music of the festival. So there was a debate afterwards, why was it suppressed? And you had a white history teacher talking about the reason why it was suppressed. So I'll leave you with that.
Okay, right. Well, thank you very much indeed, because that's very relevant too. Now, Kwaku's just put a message in here saying that he put the BMM supplement that these rallies in Parliament will be on the 18th for a number of months. Is that right, Roland? I don't think it's always on the same day of the month, Kwaku. I think it's
every 2 months, bi-monthly, and they put it up on Eventbrite.
Right, so it goes on Eventbrite and it's every couple of months. Okay, right, I think at that point I would just say a formal thank you to you, Jonathan. You stayed in also to throughout the session to see what we do with these sessions, and I think it is really important that those of us who've got an interest in working in Black history work with colleagues from the Black communities and hear about the research, the campaigning, all the different things that are going on. So I really thank you very much indeed for sharing your activity, and you're welcome to join us any Friday lunchtime to help to explore the stories.
Thank you for having me.
Really good, thank you. And thanks for everybody else for contributing. So we'll officially wrap up the recording now. Thank you very much indeed, Simon.